I want to bring in John Kiriakou now. John, I hope you had a chance to look at the indictment or at least read about it, and I want to love your take.
Yeah, read the whole indictment. I was absolutely fascinated by it. You know, the takeaway for me is this. It's that Roger Stone is a fabulist. Roger Stone is a pathological liar. And Roger Stone is just not happy unless he's the center of attention. And he wasn't the center of attention in this scandal. And so he inserted himself in it. He lied at several different stages to the wrong people, as it turned out, and now found himself with 7 felony indictments. I actually know Roger relatively well. And I can tell you that he's been worried about this since the summertime. His exchanges with Randy Kiriakou were filthy for a reason, not just because that's the kind of guy Roger is, although that's the kind of guy Roger is. But it was also because he was petrified at the notion that he might go to prison. He realized last August that he was in over his head, but by then it was too late for him to try to save himself. There was a fascinating interview on MSNBC last night with 4 of the unlikeliest characters. It was Jerome Corsi, Nussbaum, the guy that was the assistant to Roger, Michael Caputo, and Carter Page. Interestingly, Carter Page had never met any of the other 3 men that were there on the panel. That interview was the first time that they had ever met. But each one of them gave an account of their own interview or series of interviews with the Mueller team. And they all said exactly the same thing, that every single question centered around Roger Stone. And so one thing that Jerome Corsi said, and he and Roger, I guess, were friends until yesterday or the day before yesterday, was that Roger had not left his house all week because he knew that the hammer was going to fall, and he was just waiting for the FBI to knock on the door. He, I think, didn't expect them to knock on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning in full battle gear. But that's what happened. And I think for him, there's really no way out unless he flips on the president. And I think that's unlikely. It's not in his nature. I think he's going to go to prison, not for a terribly long time and not to a real prison. He'll probably end up in a minimum security work camp. But he opened his mouth one too many times, and he's going to go to prison for it.
Well, what could he be? What could he flip on the president about? I mean, if he got tipped off in advance that these emails were coming, that's not a crime, as far as I know. And the only crime is stealing the documents, and whether there was a conspiracy or collusion to steal the documents. That's nowhere to be found in this or any of the other indictments.
And he wouldn't know that anyway if that had been the case. So I think there's nothing for him to flip over, especially because he's really not been involved in this case. He inserted himself in it. There was no real role for him, so he has no inside information to give to the Mueller team in exchange for leniency.
Can you give us some insight from your own experience about how prosecutors can be extremely dishonest and deceptive to mislead the public?
Oh boy, there are literally no rules for prosecutors or for federal investigators. They can lie, they can deceive, they can cheat, they can do anything they want. And one thing that I kick myself for not reminding myself when it was happening to me is they always know the answer to the question before they ask it. And so where many of us get wrapped up is by trying to please them, trying to rack your brain to give them an honest answer, and then you end up misspeaking. That misspeaking can be used against you, of course, as a felony, making a false statement charge, or in some cases, an obstruction of justice charge. So what you ought to do in order to save yourself is, number one, and I tell this to everybody who will listen, do not talk to the feds, okay? Number two is just say, I don't recall. That's it. That's a legitimate response. I do not recall. When I had been arrested, I was charged, in addition to other things, with one count of making a false statement. I hadn't made any false statement, and of course that charge was dropped. But the prosecutors threatened me with another false statements charge and an obstruction of justice charge because I kept saying I don't recall. The honest to God's truth was that I didn't recall. And they were furious that I didn't give them an answer that they could then use against me. Well, that's one of the tricks that they have. That's the leverage that they have over you, because once you make that mistake, they immediately file a felony charge, and then they offer later on to trade it. Well, we'll drop these charges if you talk about so-and-so, or we'll drop all these other charges if you take a plea to a reduced charge. And that way they get a conviction, and that way they get a promotion, and they get a $400 performance award, and then they get to put your name on the ticker at the bottom of their website, and they all congratulate themselves. That's the system, the corrupt system that we have.